Welcome to Groundwater Rising. This podcast is all about flooding, with a focus on the forgotten source of flooding, groundwater flooding. Groundwater flooding is the least understood, least monitored, and least reported on. It is often left out of the conversation, so we are a podcast dedicated to changing that. I'm Katie Hargrave-Smith, and I'm back hosting again today. I'm from Project Groundwater, and in this podcast, I will be speaking to community members from around the UK who have to deal with groundwater flooding, and industry experts trying to help them. Together, we will uncover the latest research, innovation and strategies from the water sector, academia and beyond. Today, we will be speaking on a topic I personally feel is core to flood resilience, and that is community flood action groups. Community flood action groups can take many shapes or forms and can be referred to by a variety of different names. Generally, these flood action groups consist of local volunteers who advocate for the larger community, aiming to reduce the impact of future flood events. Their focus may include emergency planning, enhancing flood resilience, providing warnings and information, and addressing local concerns. Additionally, these groups serve as a collective voice for the community, facilitating communication with local risk management authorities. Each group determines its own roles, responsibilities, goals, and objectives. Today, we will learn from two communities proactively addressing local flood risk. One community has established a formal flood group, while the other relies on local flood wardens collaborating closely with the town council. Though their approaches to local flood response differ, both play significant roles in enhancing local flood resilience. But that's enough from me. Let's hear from them. First up, I have Hilary Martin and Trevor Kippax from Marlow. Hilary is Marlow Town Council's clerk, and Trevor is a local flood warden. Hilary and Trevor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Katie. Hilary Martin, I'm the town clerk at Marlow Town Council. I'm also the flood coordinator for the Marlow Town Flood Plan, which has been in existence since 2017.
Hello, Katie. I'm Trevor Kippax, one of the local flood wardens for part of Marlow, Gosmore area, and I coordinate through Hilary if and when it's needed.
Hilary, if I start with you, how did this all begin? So you said that it was in 2017 you did your local flood plan. How did that come about?
The flood plan in Marlow was developed by my predecessor, Annie Jones, in response to a severe flooding incident. And the flood plan was then built around the Environment Agency's multi-million-pound flood scheme to try and alleviate river and groundwater flooding in Marlow.
How did the flood wardens come to be involved in that?
I think the flood wardens, I think Trevor might even answer that question slightly better than me, because Trevor's been involved a lot longer than I have. I've been involved for the past 8 years, and this has been going on significantly longer than that. Our flood wardens were members of the community that put their hand up to help, and in Trevor's experience, unfortunately, actually got flooded.
Trevor, do you mind coming in there and telling us a little bit about how you came to be part of this?
It was all very fractured because there are two distinct areas in Marlow which are prone to flooding for various reasons. And the residents around here were trying to move matters forward and come up with something. And it was obvious that it wasn't very coordinated, it wasn't very structured. It was largely reliant upon individuals or groups of individuals trying to engage with local MPs or even national MPs. And you were either trying to get them on site and see what was going on, or you were trying to write to them and engage with them. Then in turn, you were trying to get them to engage with somebody who could do something about it. And so when Annie started to pull together this plan, it worked out quite well, because what you don't want is a load of isolated voices which turns around where somebody actually said, I think in the past, oh, there's only a couple of people that are complaining about this. You actually need a whole load of people together saying, please do something about this, because the danger with it is that it features in the local press for a day or two and then it's gone. So everybody thinks it's very transitional. The reality is that if your house is flooded, it's between 8 and 12 months to get your life back anywhere near on track. And in some cases, it's even more devastating because one of the areas around the corner is bungalows. So they haven't got anywhere upstairs to take anything. We were quite lucky in one respect, in so much as we could at least move stuff to a higher area where it didn't get damaged. But if you're in bungalows and if you've got vulnerable people, there's one neighbour particularly who, I wouldn't describe it as panic attacks, but because of what she's seen happen to her house, if the water starts coming up the garden and you feel totally useless because you just sit there watching and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think it was all those things coming together that Annie decided we need a coordinated plan. It needs to be something that everybody will engage with, and it needs to have these channels opened so that you've got communication to the various people to get some action.
And is that something that you feel is really key about this plan, is that you know more about how to contact, I'm assuming, is that risk management authorities when it is flooding?
Yes, because Hilary, in her situation, can coordinate what the various flood wardens are feeding in, so Hilary can look at the whole picture. Whereas in the past, when it all first started, it was like isolated spots jumping up and down and saying, we've got a problem, and it was like firefighting. What we're moving towards, I think, is a more proactive rather than a reactive situation. Because reacting, it's too late, it's happened. Something more proactive and getting people at the Environment Agency and getting people at Bucks and getting other people sorting things out is a far better way to do it.
Hilary, do you mind talking a bit about, maybe you weren't involved, but getting that plan written together? Was it quite a long process? How did people feed in?
It was huge. I mean, I wasn't involved in the original writing of the plan, but the most recent major overhaul that we did in 2019, we wrote in conjunction with Vince Gray, the head of community resilience at Buckinghamshire, and in conjunction with Bucks Council and the Environment Agency, and with Trevor's help as one of our flood wardens, we put the whole revised flood plan through a detailed test in January to actually test our efficiency of our systems based on a live flood alert warning from the Environment Agency. So it's been through several changes since the original plan was constructed, and we continue to recruit flood wardens in all of our areas to make sure we've got enough eyes on the ground of what's actually happening.
And do you find it easy or quite difficult to recruit flood wardens? Is that a struggle that you've come across?
It is very difficult. Unfortunately, the lack of flooding means it's harder to get flood wardens, which I think Trevor will agree with. I think, your motivation once you've been flooded is to make sure this never happens again and you want to be involved. We're now trying to recruit people in closes, particularly in the west of Marlow. They've never experienced flooding since they moved in 2018 or since then. So they don't seem to have much interest because they don't actually realise how much they could be impacted. And that is a challenge.
I agree. Even when you get regular events, they're probably a year apart or 2 years apart or 5 years apart. So it's still difficult to get people to engage when it's something. And the other factor is people don't want to think about the houses being flooded. Particularly at this time of the year, they're thinking about Christmas and the relatives and all the rest of it. The last thing they want to think about is devastation.
I am the same. I can struggle to see how I would get engaged in something if I hadn't experienced it myself. But equally, what you're trying to do is make it so that when you do experience it, it's not as bad. You can't necessarily prevent the flood, but you can get people prepared and ready so that you're a lot faster in your response and your recovery. So how have you gone about in trying to kind of solve this issue? Is there something you've tried? Have you managed to get people who aren't as engaged and interested, or is that actually still an ongoing struggle?
It's still an ongoing problem. And I think, Katie, unfortunately, is reflected throughout our community. We're lucky in Marlow. There is a big volunteer community in lots of walks of life, but there's still a shortage of volunteers in every sector. We've got issues with our local Sea Cadet troop at the moment that they may have to close because they don't have enough people volunteering to go and run the evenings for the kids that are interested. So the volunteering sector has a problem as a whole. And I think flooding is just one of those.
And so what kind of roles do people do kind of on a day-to-day with the flood warden? Is there something is it quite a big ask, or is it only when there's flooding?
Well, Trevor may disagree. He's out there all the time as soon as we've got a flood alert, keeping an eye on things. But it's a really important pivotal role. It's not just looking and seeing, is the water rising? Are the scheme measures that the EA put in, are they working? Does the picture on the ground agree with the telemetry that the duty flood officer is telling me? No, often than not, it doesn't. And that's one of the problems we do get involved in a lot of the time. But it's more important than that. It's knowing your community. And being a flood warden, to my mind, and in Trevor's case particularly, is being a bit of a community leader in your little bit of Marlow, that you're there, you're keeping your fellow residents informed about what's happening. And if anyone is vulnerable, you're invoking the flood plan to make sure they get the help that they need. So it's quite a big community role.
I would agree with that. I mean, close was bungalows, and there were 2 or 3 people there that were on the vulnerable scale, in so much as they would have needed help. One lady would need help in getting physically out of the property if the water starts to come up. There are a couple, well, in fact, it's not a couple because Joe Bangay died some years ago now, but their house is round by the river. And when the flood came in 2013, I think it needed an army truck to go down and try and persuade them to leave. And the water was within an inch, I think, of coming into the house. And they were not of the sort of people for leaving. They were going to stay there until the bitter end. That situation has changed a bit. But as Hilary says, it's knowing where the issues are. I've got one neighbour who's relatively close. You have to go around and reassure her as soon as there's a flood warning, because the dread starts when your phone rings or you get an email that says there's a flood warning in your area, or there's a flood alert, sorry, to start off with, and then there's the flood warning. And for some people, this particular lady that I'm thinking of, you can see the tension rising. You can see her starting to panic and think, oh my God. So part of the role, I think, as a flood warden is not only making sure that everybody's on the same page, and we can talk about that a little bit later, as Hilary's already mentioned, but it's making sure that you can reassure people. And you can only reassure people if you've got the knowledge and the ability to know what's going on. So it's got to be a two-way communication all the time.
Yeah, I feel like you really hit like the nail on the head on why I feel that local flood groups are so important and local flood wardens, because you know people, you know their fears, you know their vulnerabilities, you have access to this kind of information, and they likely trust you far more than like someone they don't know coming in and being like, you're at risk, you have to leave your home and somewhere you're very attached to. But if it's someone that you've like had constant conversations with, who've checked in on you many times, the benefit of that and the support they'll have for people is so key. Big thank you for everything you do, and I'm sure everyone feels similarly. And it's why I think it's really good that we are talking about this and that you're here today. So, not to bring us back to the struggles, but I think as we've started touching on them, where do you find is like for your flood group, and probably for like all flood groups, where is it that you are really struggling with beyond just volunteers?
We're struggling with our communication with the Environment Agency. It has improved. Things have definitely got better, but especially when we go to flood warning status from flood alert status, I am back in Groundhog Day, having the same conversations about the same issues time and time again, and the picture on the ground not reflecting the telemetry they're looking at on a computer. And that's the real frustration. I'm ending up FaceTiming the duty flood incident officer from a resident's garden because they're telling me the pump doesn't need to go on. And I'm saying it's a metre from the house. The pump would normally be on by now. And that's a frustration. With such a big organisation, it's taking a long time to improve that. It has got better. When I phone now, I do normally get straight through to the incident officer, or they will phone me back. Whereas historically, it would be 24 hours before I would even get a phone call back. And we are the eyes and ears on the ground of what's actually happening. So it's improving, but that's probably my biggest frustration is the communication with the EA and them not listening to the picture on the ground.
Do you ever worry that, say, if you choose to move on from this role that you do and someone comes in, that then they'll have to reestablish a relationship? Or do you feel that the role that you play is who they listen to?
It's the role, it's the title. I don't think it's down to me as an individual, and our flood plan is well developed. If in my absence it passes to my deputy, in her absence it passes to the mayor, in the mayor's absence it passes to the deputy mayor. So we've got quite a good structure in place if for any reason I'm not available. It's the role, the flood coordinator role, which the Environment Agency should be listening to, not the individual. Saying that, I do think I have developed some stronger relationships with some of the duty officers, and there's certainly duty officers that I get far better service from than others. The ones that have dealt with me before know that I'm not panicking unnecessarily. I'm not screaming because there's a small pool of water outside someone's house. I am contacting them because there's a real danger of flooding and their pumping system's not working. So that relationship building is there, but I think our plan is built so well, it doesn't matter who the flood coordinator is, it should still work fine.
I would disagree very slightly, and I'm sure Hilary won't be offended. If I describe her, she's got the resilience of a Rottweiler, because you need to be constantly at it. You need to be constantly on the case. The good thing is that because Hilary can see the overall picture, from her own judgment now, she can work out, okay, this is important. And like Hilary just said, standing in somebody's garden when there's water around your willies, saying to the Environment Agency, this is the reality. Because there is a disconnect. It's only a few days ago that I phoned Floodline just for a bit of devilment, and the information they gave me, you listen to the recorded message that says, oh, this is what's happening in the Thames at Marlow. And the reality was, no, they were looking at telemetry that hadn't moved for 3 days because there was something wrong with it. They put me through to the incident room, and the incident room didn't know it was wrong either. And we went through several iterations before we actually got to a situation where I spoke to Hilary, and it was obvious that different people had got different pieces of information and they didn't all agree. It's not to be unexpected because the flood line is based somewhere in Sheffield. So how were they going to know unless they're looking at a screen? But it's the bits that aren't working, but they don't know, that the worry. Because I can't go and reassure people and say everything's fine when I'm thinking, well, actually, it's not fine, because they don't know whether it's fine or not. but it is getting better. And I think Hilary has established some really good connections and feeding it all through rather than having, because if 6 or 8 flood wardens were all trying to harass the Environment Agency at the same time, they may well think, well, actually, somebody's panicking. This is not actually as bad as it should be. Whereas if Hilary can look at it and moderate it and say, okay, that area is not a problem, but that area is definitely a problem, it makes for a more considered approach. And I think that's why Hilary's got such a good relationship. And they know when she phones and says, you need to do something, that they need to do something.
And I've heard Flood Mary, who's obviously a wealth of knowledge on all things flooding. She said before that she really advises like flood groups or someone who is flooding when they contact their local authority and risk management to try and be firm but polite, which is actually a very difficult thing, because if you're in a state of potential panic and you are very like fearful for your property, for your life in some ways, being firm but polite is quite hard because you're probably speaking from emotion. But it sounds like you agree that there's that element of, and Hilary's got this down to a T, of this is what is needed to be done. I'm very serious. I know what I'm saying. And that kind of that level of trust now in the knowledge that you have locally is key.
I can remember when Hilary speaks, it says that Annie, and I think it was Bucks had delivered sandbags. And Annie said to me, stand on that pile of sandbags and don't let anybody take them unless I say they can have them, because people from a long way away were panicking and coming and saying, we need sandbags, we need sandbags. They didn't actually need sandbags because they were probably not going to flood unless it got to the 1947 levels, I think, in which case then they would have had a problem. But this idea they had in the mind about floodwater, all of a sudden, and it wasn't a riot, but it was getting to a point where the people that actually needed the sandbags couldn't get them because people that were never going to need them were sort of in this state of panic.
And again, that's where it feels like the local flood wardens can come in and be that voice of knowledge and reason, that if you don't have that locally, it's going to be very difficult to manage that. So what other benefits do you feel that having a local response, does it give?
I think there's potential for us to develop our flood plan even further with community resilience. And I am talking to the community resilience team at the moment about actually rolling out the flood plan model for a community emergency plan, because the plan works so well, the structure works, and it could easily transfer into a community emergency plan if we can get the volunteers to do it. But we are looking at that structure. I think it's given us a really good community model for how we can all look after each other.
Do you think that there's enough support for community flood plans for you guys at the moment and to do this work?
Support is quite a generic term to use. I think the support we now get from the unitary authority for us, Buckinghamshire Council, has improved massively by re-evaluating our plan and actually working in conjunction with them. It's brought them completely on board to actually take us seriously as an organisation with our own flood plan. I'm now included on all the safety briefings once we get to flood alert status. I'm completely kept in the loop about what's happening in Buckinghamshire as a whole, and I have direct access to the cabinet member responsible for any incident. So that relationship has actually improved massively. We just need to replicate that with some of the other agencies that are involved, Thames Water and the Environment Agency, so that they view the fact that we have a plan and we know what we're doing with the same status.
And Trevor, is there anything you think as a flood warden that would support you, or do you feel that you get a really good amount of support so far?
For me personally, I get a really good level of support, and I know that I can contact Hilary either an email or voicemail or just give her a call, depending on how important it is, and I'll get a response. And I think the EA are getting better with that, as evidence. One of the EA guys phoned me the other day and said, oh, we're going to close the floodgates at Millbank because the river levels are coming up. I think what would help is we need to develop other things like the EA being more proactive. One of the issues that we've seen is that Marlow gets the flood alert. And if you then look at the locks at Marlow and the locks further downstream, there's only Marlow on high flood alert. And you sort of think, hang on, how is that happening? That they know what the water is going to be in any given place at any given point of time. Why aren't they making better preparations? Because they can drain the Jubilee River so that if it's needed, they can fill it up. So why can't they pass more water down the Thames earlier so that actually we're not on high alert? Everybody's in the same situation. You can look at the various telemetry and say, well, ours is above where it should be top of normal. but none of the other places further down the river are. And I think one of the other things that maybe, and I don't know who this is, whether it's the local authority or individuals, there are lots of things that people can buy to help prevent flooding, put things across the doors, etc. But the standard response from the councils and from the Environment Agency is sandbags. Sandbags don't work. You know, anybody that's been to a beach with a youngster and seen them tip water in the sand, it just drains up. And all the sandbags do is just filter. So they don't actually stop the water getting into the houses. Whereas the normal reaction, and you see it on the national news, if an area is flooding, there's loads of people there with loads of sandbags. It's possibly a sort of, it makes people feel better that they're physically doing something, but it doesn't actually do anything practically useful. It's those sort of things maybe that need to be developed a little bit more. And particularly with the Environment Agency, we've seen where we have to prompt them maybe to do routine maintenance. We have to prompt them to do clearance near specific things that are integral to the flood plan. And there isn't always coordination. There's been quite a lot of work in Marlow recently by Thames Water, putting in new sewers, etc. And they've been doing things which, again, coordinated through Hilary. We've said, well, is that going to have an impact on this expensive scheme that was put in place because they've just dug something up or they've just moved something in a particular area? There isn't that coordination that I think there needs to be, because it's being done outside the flood season, if you like. So it doesn't necessarily get linked up.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Trevor's just said there, Katie. And I think in terms of actual funding for flood items other than the sandbags, which we all now know are pretty useless, it would be really useful to see something coming down more from the Unitary Authority or other agencies where we could offer discounted items for those people who are likely to flood and actually give them some proactive advice on better things to actually buy, like the doorstop scenario that Trevor was talking about.
I have heard since joining in the flood industry that sandbags, I think it's one of those ones where people, they learn a couple of things about flooding. They're like, this is it, which is like dredging rivers, sandbags. And these are two things that actually maybe once upon a time they were the best case, but they're not that, but they're just so ingrained in everything we think and do. But I think my Bucks colleagues might be upset if I didn't say, I know that they also don't like sandbags.
It's true, we know.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you think we should talk about when it comes to flood groups? If there's anything you think that we haven't touched on yet?
Other than everybody who's involved in the local flood group, particularly Trevor, who I always describe as my lead flood warden, should be sincerely thanked for the service that they give to our community, because it wouldn't be the safe place it is if people didn't volunteer to help, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
And is there any advice you could give to areas that don't have a flood group, be that either the local authority or local residents who are considering that actually think this could be something that would be beneficial to them? Where do you think they should start?
It's really easy to start with, if you're in the Buckinghamshire area particularly, you've got a unitary authority that has a whole community resilience team, and there's someone that will literally draft the plan for you and guide you through every step of the way. Just don't look at it as a big thing. Don't be scared of starting it. It looks like a big project, but there are specialists available that will help you completely free of charge and help you make a start.
One of the scary things for me from time to time is if you see the river coming up or this, that and the other, people seem to have a scant disregard for how dangerous it can be. Because one of the things that can happen on the roads is that manholes can come up. And it happened at the last, I think 2013, you saw families coming along to see what was going on. And you think, hang on, you've got small children. And I actually said to a couple of people, don't walk around in floodwater because you have no idea. If you see the emergency services, they've all got long poles and they're poking around in front of them to make sure that where they're walking is safe. And we have people walking along Gosmore because it's a beautiful area in the summer and people walk naturally and they'll bring the dogs and all the rest of it. And there were people bringing children down to have a look. And there were people driving backwards and forwards along the road to have a look. And I only realised the other day that actually driving along, if your vehicle makes a wash and it can wash it down somebody's drive and make the situation worse, it's actually illegal. But as a flood warden, you have no ability to say, stop, you can't. I mean, eventually the road got closed in places, which was helpful, but you still see lots of people. How you address that, I'm not sure. It needs to be given some thought, probably at a higher level, to say that if you've got a red area, for example, then you're not, unless you're a resident or within the locality, you shouldn't be in it. Whether that will work, I don't know. If a small child steps onto a hole that's there,
Wouldn't even want to think about that.
No.
I think, yeah, you're moving into that idea of general flood awareness, and as climate change continues, and as we get more of these events, people who've never been involved in flooding before is suddenly do that. And actually, as a country, we need much better understanding of flooding, of the risks of flooding, how dirty flood water can be. It's very dangerous to just wade in it, because if you get it on your hands, if you're not being good enough at washing your hands properly, like there's a lot of risks that come with flooding. I think the EA always promote the 30 centimeters of water can move your car. So you'd think 30 centimeters isn't that much. It's sort of like you might try and drive through a puddle like that. But actually that's enough to really shift your car, and that could do some real damage to you, to other people, to like properties around, considering other people's properties as you drive. There's a lot that maybe I think as a country, those who aren't so aware of flooding haven't really had to think about this before. And then when they do, they're like, oh, I wonder what's going on there. I'll go have a look. And we are a bit too curious. We do like to know what's going on in our area, and we want something to gossip about. But maybe giving flooding the respect is quite a dangerous thing that it deserves, is an area that as a society we can improve upon. And that often does come from, you're right, up above, and kind of getting that messaging out there, as well as on the ground, you guys going and just speaking to people. Amazing. Thank you both so much for joining me today. It has been really interesting for me, and I'm sure incredibly useful for all of our listeners. And I'm hoping this might spark off a couple more flood groups to kick off in some new areas. And thank you for listening to Groundwater Rising. We're a new podcast looking to grow, so please hit the subscribe button on your podcast provider, leave us a review, and tell your friends and colleagues about us. Do you have a topic you'd like us to focus on Groundwater Rising, or would you like to join me to share your personal groundwater flood story? Please email me on groundwaterrising@projectgroundwater.co.uk. That's all for now. We'll be back again on the last Thursday of this month with another episode of Groundwater Rising.